That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. But we got this good pilot data that's actually most of the data.
Yeah,
Can you fund it for me to do
that's
it for
basically what I was planning on doing. Yeah. The genetic stuff is hard to fund through the fishery organizations. Like NOAA kind of cares, but not about sheep's head because they're not federally managed.
Yeah.
They're only managed by the states. And the states kind of just assume that they're doing fine without really doing much of a shock assessment for them. So they could be doing fine. I don't think they're doing terrible, but
they're definitely visual because they're always around places where people are there.
Right, so it looks like there's a lot of them. And then when they spawn.
Shane went ahead and kicked it live so he could hear y'all's conversation.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right, that's fine. Oh, well, we're just talking about shit.
Yeah. Well, at least they can hear.
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer we have till.
Hi everybody, I'm Pierce Cooper. I'm a Ph.D. student here at the Sea Lab. I'd like to introduce everybody to the Dauphin Island Sea Lab Alumni Seminar Series, which is put on by the Graduate Student Organization and Dr. Sebrian, who's graciously helped us fund some of this. And the purpose of the Alumni Seminar Series is to give young marine scientists and graduate students kind of a feel for the different career paths that they can go through after the Sea Lab, and we have invited ex-graduate students to come by and talk about their experiences in postgraduate life. Dr. Sparks was a PhD student with Dr. Sebrian. He graduated from the Sea Lab and the University of South Alabama in 2014 after completing his dissertation on the effectiveness of black needle marsh restoration, as well as examining nutrient filtration and the effects of grazing. Dr. Sparks is currently an assistant extension professor with Mississippi State University Coastal Research and Extension Center in Biloxi, Mississippi, as well as the coordinator of the Master Naturalist program in Mississippi State University. And he's also a coastal ecology specialist with Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant. His interests include coastal and estuarine restoration, as well as coastal ecology. So without further ado, here's Dr. Sparks.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me. It's always good to come back to Dauphin Island. You take for granted the drive over the bridge to get here when you're in grad school, but you really start missing it the more years you're away from it. And I haven't been away that long, but I still miss it pretty good bit down here. So again, thanks for having me. And this is not a science talk. I don't have a single graph in the whole thing, so hopefully I won't bore y'all to death with this. And it's more tailored toward kind of what I did when I was going through school. Maybe I did some things wrong, maybe I didn't, and then how that transitioned to the job that I have now. So with that, Pierce sent me a really good list of questions that I should address through this talk, or suggested questions, but I took it to heart. So I pretty much structured the talk based on these 7 questions that are listed above, and I kind of addressed them in groups because it was hard to pull apart, addressing this question versus that question. So for this first little chunk of the presentation, it focuses on pretty much questions 1 and 2 that are listed up there. So I was born and raised in Alabama, kind of northeast Alabama, a little town called Allgood, 1 square mile. Wikipedia it. It's really small. We have 2 stop signs, and that's it in the town. So then I moved a little further south for my undergraduate degree at Troy University, and I got my bachelor's there in marine biology in 2008. And then immediately after that, came down to Dauphin Island. Well, let me back up 1 second. At Troy University, it's part of the consortium here, so a lot of the undergrad marine biology classes come to the Sea Lab in the summer. So I started coming to the Sea Lab in summer 2006, and then took classes down here and TA'd for 3 summers, and then started grad school here after I finished up at Troy. And I met Juice taking his marine botany class, and I guess I didn't scare him away, and so he took me on for as a master's student that eventually transitioned into a Ph.D. And so I was here at the Sea Lab from 2008 to 2014, and it was an awesome experience. Y'all, don't take for granted the resources that you have here at the Sea Lab. Just something as simple as getting to go out on a boat, or getting access to boats, or buying things. We have a really streamlined process here, and you'll realize that once you get out and go on your different career paths. Then, kind of as I was finishing up my PhD, I got hired on for a marsh restoration research project over at the Weeks Bay Foundation, and finished up my PhD while starting that, and that transitioned into a postdoc, a relatively short postdoc with, it was funded through the Weeks Bay Foundation. I was housed at the Weeks Bay Foundation, but my advisor was Dr. Julia Cherry through the University of Alabama. And that was, a couple months long, July to October 2014. So it was a really short postdoc, but I was somewhat working on it before I finished up my PhD, so it felt a lot longer than that. And so I applied for jobs, got picked up by the Southwest Florida Water Management District, which is, this particular district is based out of Brooksville, Florida, which is where, especially if you're in Carmichael's lab, y'all go down that way a good bit with all the manatee stuff that you have going on. Yeah, manatees are really thick in that area. I was classified as a senior environmental scientist, worked there from about November 2014 to February 2015, and then got offered the job that I'm at now, and hopefully I don't have to go through the job hunting process again. So I just really need to watch my mouth while I'm talking here, since it's streaming live, and not say anything stupid. But so now I'm with Mississippi State University Extension and Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant. I wouldn't really say it's 2 hats that I wear for this. It's more like 1 hat with 2 logos on it, because a lot of the duties somewhat overlap there. Again, I'm an assistant extension professor of estuarine and wetland ecology. I had to read that because I forget what it is sometimes at Mississippi State University. I'm affiliated with 2 departments there. The first one being the Coastal Research and Extension Center, which is housed out of Biloxi. And then the other, my own campus department, is the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. So I'm affiliated with both of those departments, and also a coastal ecology specialist with the Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. And it's a split between my time, basically, between these 2 jobs. I get paid, X amount of months from either source. And so I want to kind of call out some people in the room here a little bit. So how many first or second year students do we have here? Raise your hand. Anybody want to try to hit on this question here? What do you think extension is? It's something that I couldn't have answered in year 2 of grad school. But just shoot off some ideas on what you think extension is. Anybody? Anything? Just a guess. Nothing stupid. Come on.
Based out of somewhere besides the actual university?
I hear that a lot. It's No, that's not it. But anybody else? Yeah. Somewhat. And how would you think it's related to consulting or have similar duties to consulting?
For somebody wanting to do like a nonprofit or something, wanting to do a marsh restoration program, they might consult you about kind of the best way to do that.
Yeah. That's definitely within the realm, and it is somewhat similar to consulting in that you get the kind of one-on-one connections with a lot of your clientele, and they really get to know you. They hopefully trust you for the information that you provide. So it does serve in somewhat of a consulting role. And anybody else have anything? If not, I'll go on and hopefully try to answer that question. So if you go online and Google extension, which is what I did right before I made this talk, where I would hopefully find a good, clear definition for it. There's really no established definition. And actually, if you go on Wikipedia, there's a list of like 20 different definitions based on what year that definition was established. So the most recent one, it says extension is the process of enabling change in individuals, communities, and industries. That somewhat hits on kind of what extension is, but you don't really get a good idea of what you actually do there, do you? And there would be a lot of extension professors or extension agents that would say, that doesn't really fit into what my job description is. It's pretty, it is what you make of it, almost. A lot of extension agents are referred to as, and professors, honest brokers of knowledge, because we get paid the same regardless. We're not making any money off of providing you with good information. We don't try to steer you to certain products. We try to steer you to ways to help you in the long run, save money, help the environment, any and all. Again, I'm still way at the high level definition here, or high level examples. The extension service motto for Mississippi State is extending knowledge, changing lives. And so I think that's a somewhat more robust definition, a simpler definition than what Wikipedia gives you here. But pretty much what we do is we try to figure out who needs knowledge, who needs whatever knowledge that is already available. And we try to figure out ways to package that knowledge in an easily understandable way and get it to those people where they can help themselves pretty much, whether it's using best management practices to reduce nutrient removal, which may help their neighbor. It may also help them too if they're regulated by a government agency, to determining the density of plants that you need to plant for a restoration project that can help maybe save you money on the front end, and also on the back end of things. So it's a really difficult concept to get your head around because it's really loosely defined. But the end goal is to get the information out to whoever you think needs it, determine what information gaps there are, and hopefully in the process of getting the information to them, you can change their lives, make them better. So I know you're probably still like, I really don't know what that extension stuff is, even after that slide up there. But most of the extension type jobs are associated with land-grant universities. Are y'all familiar with land-grant universities? The ones in the area are Mississippi State, Auburn, University of Florida, and there's several others around, but those are the ones that are kind of more immediate here. And these universities were set up under the premise that a lot of their work would focus on applied and practical science. And what that basically means is exactly what I was telling you in the extension side of things. You need to figure out exactly what people can use in the real world. It's kind of a split between basic and applied science. There's a lot of folks here at the C Lab that do basic and applied science. Some may lean more toward basic, some may lean toward applied. produce some really good information that us as extension folks can use and maybe build upon and get it out to the appropriate stakeholders and end users to hopefully get that stuff implemented into their watershed management plans, their restoration plans, and so forth. I'm using examples from, kind of what I know. The primary role of these, I'm not going to say primary role, what the more historic focus of the Extension Service has been on agricultural practices. So a lot of these land-grant universities, you'll hear them referred to as cow colleges. Have y'all heard that terminology before? It's because they do a lot of ag-focus-based research and extension activities to get the information to farmers because they're one of the largest clientele groups for the Extension Service. And that is a huge range of stuff that I don't even know all that involves in agricultural extension other than nutrient removal, best management practices, and so forth. And that leads into sea grant. It's similar to the land grant system, similar but different. In my mind, I like to think about it as the land grant for the ocean, and it focuses primarily on coastal and marine resources, but we extend a little bit further than that, doing a lot of these watershed management plans that Juice and Josh have been working on a lot lately, and so on and so forth. Pretty much, if you just think about it in your mind, it's the land grant for the ocean and coastal areas, or anything that influences the ocean or coastal areas. It's a good way to think about it. I put this picture up here because this is an example of a extension project that I've been working on a little bit lately, and a lot of other extension professors have been working on. That's Spartina being grown at a nursery. So with a lot of these restoration projects coming on board, we're not going to have enough room to really go out and tear up marshes, I forgot what the preferred word is there on utilizing natural marsh plants to basically transplant into restored areas. But whatever it is, we're not going to be able to go out and dig up plants from natural areas to put in restoration plots because we just don't have that much marsh to give. So an area of research and extension duties is to figure out how successful these nursery type plants are, what size pots you should grow, how deep should they be, what species do best, how should you plant them, what arrangement. That's all, it seems somewhat like basic information there, but it's all things that are really not known right now and that can be directly utilized in the areas that we work in, coastal and marine resources. So that's an example of some extension type work that's going on now involving marsh restoration. And I pulled this figure off the internet. It's a pretty good depiction of the kind of different branches of research extension and education and kind of where everything falls. Honestly, I think the difference between, say, an extension professor and a research professor or a Ph.D. in education, it's kind of getting blurry now because we all work in the different areas at some point going forward. But this is, in general, what is thought of to be kind of the divide. Research, this would probably be more focused toward basic research and, a hybrid of basic and applied, but more on the basic side of things that provide answers to complex issues by doing innovative, high-tech research. And then the extension folks, we're supposed to take that knowledge or figure out what we need to do research-wise and get out and actually do that and package it together, get it out to the people that can use it. And then the education is more on the, as it says, the education side of things, which there is some education involved in extension work as well. There's a lot of education involved with it, but it's not the classic education that you think of. It's more adult-based classes, workshops, certification courses, that kind of stuff. So I like that figure, and it shows the divide and everything, but just keep in the back of your mind, you're probably going to be doing a little bit of everything with your job going forward, and a lot of the professors here do a little bit of all three of those avenues. So now diving into kind of what I do in my job on a daily basis. Again, like I said, Mississippi State University Extension and Sea Grant. I'm lumping them together here because a lot of my duties overlap. I do have some duties that are exclusive for Mississippi State, some for Sea Grant, but in general, they overlap there. So that's my two funding sources there. And these are the programs that I run. As Pierce mentioned, the Master Naturalist program is program-wise the one that probably takes the majority of my time. It's a really enjoyable program, and I'll dive into it a little later. And I forgot to mention, all of these are lumped together under what's called the Coastal Environmental Extension Program. So if you Google that and Mississippi State, it'll bring you to pretty much this list that I have right here. Master Naturalist is one of them. Habitat Restoration Program, Living Shorelines, Nutrient Management, Ecosystem Services, Coastal Resiliency, and Nature-Based Tourism. So you start diving into things that you really don't think you would dive into when you get a research-based degree, such as what you get from the Sea Lab. And what a lot of these duties mean is you sit in on a bunch of advisory panels, go to a lot of meetings, attend a lot of workshops, put on a lot of workshops. So it's a lot of interacting with the folks that make these decisions. For instance, mayors of cities, contractor, consulting companies that may need a little help in designing and implementing restoration projects, like trying to train them up where they can go out and do the best job possible based on the current knowledge. And so that's what a lot of these involve. They also involve direct research as well, as I'll talk to a little bit later. So the Master Naturalist program, this is like I said, this one takes up program-wise probably more time than the others. It's not the majority of my time, but a lot of time. And the general premise behind this program is to improve the public's understanding of natural resources, and in hopes that we can convince them to employ conservation strategies, best management practices, just overall preserve our environment, and even help with restoration projects. Another objective is to develop a volunteer network. That's the backbone of the program there. It's a volunteer-based program. We can assign values to the number of volunteer hours that we get and use that in matching grants and get a lot of good projects done for relatively low cost. So it's a very, like I said, this is the backbone for the program. It's a very strong program we're building right now. We just got our logo like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. So, but it's been going on since 2008. Another objective, which kind of goes into the improving public understanding of natural resources, is to extend our educational capabilities in the Extension Service past what we could actually do ourselves. I mean, there's only a certain amount of people there. You can only do so many presentations a day, do so many projects. If we can get a volunteer base to kind of help with these things and lead some of them, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck, I guess, going forward. We do like a basic training course where you learn pretty much, this is Mississippi based, but you go and learn somewhat basic concepts of all the different ecosystems that you'll encounter from up in North Mississippi all the way down to the coast. Of course, we focus a little bit more on the coastal resources for the coastal chapter of the program. We also have a chapter up in Jackson, Mississippi, which is the central program. They focus more on the resources that are around them. But you get exposure to a lot of things, and I learned a lot of things in this class just from listening to the guest speakers on forestry, forest ecology. Out at Crosby Arboretum, they have a really good program based on like using native plants in landscaping purposes, and so it's a very good program. I'm not just saying that because I've run the program, but it's something that I learned a lot just from the first year of running it, because I didn't know much at all about a lot of the forest ecology kind of things. I feel like I'm okay on the coastal stuff, but we do trips, out to the barrier islands, which in Mississippi that's a big deal to get out to the barrier islands. Here you live on a barrier island, so it's not a big a deal to y'all. But we'll do an all-day boat trip to go out to Horn Island and come back doing some trawling. But they really seem to enjoy that. I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of people take the classes, to be able to get out on these field trips. Go to Grand Bay near, and these two pictures are the Grand Bay near. But generally, you just get a real broad understanding of the ecosystems you have around you, and hopefully that can make you start to really appreciate them and want to preserve them for the future. As part of the program, they do a lot of projects, and these hopefully, some of them have led into extension publications already, but hopefully some of the rest of these will lead into extension publications later on down the road. This is just from last year's coastal class. We had a curriculum coordinator for a school district in, and she's trying to develop a junior Master Naturalist program based on what she's learned in the program that we have now that she can implement in her schools. This is the one that's about to be published. We had a couple that were in the medical field that took the class, and they focused their class project on really backing up scientifically, basically a literature review of physiological and psychological benefits of having outdoor play for kids. That's stuff you really don't think you're really going to get into when you're doing a marine science degree here, but it's something that's very important and very interesting once you start getting in that. That's going to be like in a pamphlet that should come out. They're making it pretty now up at the design team at Mississippi State, and hopefully that'll be out relatively soon. We had another group that had a lot of artists in it, and they developed a cartoon, like a storyboard for a cartoon that focuses on turtle, terrapin, and tortoise conservation, and best practices to employ, like when to really have an eye out for turtles. I think they had like May through September, really watch out on the roads, and they pinpointed certain roads that you should watch out for turtles on, because I think cars kill more turtles than anything else in the area. So again, something that I never thought that I'd be doing as I was doing marsh plantings and research here, but something that I'm really enjoy doing. Pros and cons of conservation easements. We had a lady in the class that was really passionate. I would say an extreme tree hugger here, really passionate. And she had some land and she wanted to put it in a conservation easement. She just didn't know how to go about doing that. And but it also ended up that we had somebody that was high up in the land trust that took the class too. So those two partnered up to develop a brochure or a pamphlet on the pros and cons of conservation easements. Again, something that like I didn't know what a conservation easement was until a couple years ago. So it's you expand your horizons a good bit. And then the last but not least is developing promotional brochures to promote hazardous waste cleanups, which are typically not well attended on the coast. It's something that is very important. You'll reduce your contaminants in your waterways a lot if you can really get out the word on things like this. So it's different than a research-based job in that you're doing all that kind of stuff. But kind of transition over to the research and extension duties that are more in y'all's wheelhouse that I interact with. The habitat restoration, living shorelines, and nutrient management programs. And these are all extensions of what I did for my Ph.D. while I was here. So, I mean, that was pretty much my Ph.D. project. This was the postdoc project, and this is one that we recently got funded, where you're looking at trying to figure out the most cost-effective ways to restore these areas or design these enhancement or restoration projects while also being functional and sustainable. So you look at things such as how much habitat do they provide, how much nutrients can they remove, using these different designs that you have and how that relates to cost, and then throw sea level rise on top of it to see how long these projects should last. Because if you're spending money on these projects, you want them to last more than a couple years, because we probably won't have this, hopefully we won't have another oil spill and have these big projects coming on board. So we want to make what we have as robust as possible and sustainable as possible. And these programs through Extension Service and Sea Grant deal with things like salt marsh restoration. You can see all the different techniques that are used in salt marsh restoration. Sea Grant just published an article or a little booklet on hydrological restoration projects, kind of how-to guide, kind of high level. This is what you should really be looking at to gauge if your site's suitable for a hydro project, what you should do with your, as far as permitting goes, possible benefits that you get back from it, and approximate costs too. Real world applied information that's based on the basic research that was done in the past. Again, that's what Extension's all about. Oyster restoration projects, and then the kind of hybrid blend of these things of oyster with marsh restoration called living shorelines projects. And I know that most of y'all are aware with what a living shoreline project is, but this is something that's probably going to be taking a lot of my time going forward, given that there's so many really large-scale living shorelines projects coming on board in Mississippi and Alabama. And so evaluating, helping with design on those kind of things are things that I'm hoping to get involved in relatively soon. We have 2 funded projects right now. Juiced is on both of these projects. There's a lot of other collaborators too, but it would take me 15 minutes to list out everybody on it. But if you're watching online, you know who you are. One of them is the NEARS Science Collaborative funded project, and this one's actually over in Bon Secours Bay, just south of the Weeks Bay Near, where we're looking at these breakwaters that the Nature Conservancy and the Weeks Bay Near put out in 2012, evaluating them for functionality, planting behind several of them to see if you should or should not plant behind these, is that cost effective or not, and then looking at some naturally colonized marsh back there as well. So we're going to use those nursery grown sides, hopefully in different sizes where we can look at that going forward and compare that to naturally colonized marsh, and then areas that haven't been colonized for a lot of different impacts, such as or a lot of different functions, such as habitat, nutrient removal, carbon sequestration, and shoreline stabilization. Looking at that both with breakwaters and without breakwaters, the no breakwater sites will be up here, which is actually south of there, because they're planning on putting in about, I forget how long of a stretch that is. It's a couple miles worth of these same type living shorelines down here for a NERDA project. So they're using these techniques now, so we need to kind of, as we're going, evaluate on the best way possible, determine if you should plant behind them, how big of an impact you get related to the cost going forward. Again, just think about everything in a applied realm, and you should be pretty good when it comes to extension type work. Another is the project funded through the EPA Wetlands Program, where we're looking at how grain size, so that would be sand, large grain size. This would be mud, small grain size, slope and planting density, and sea level rise can influence nutrient removal capacity of planted marshes, since arguably nutrient removal is one of the most monetarily valuable services that salt marshes provide. That's one we really need to look at And this could be applicable to like industrial settings where you have point discharges out of a plant or something like that. You know, you can get an idea of how much nutrients you can remove with these different designs. And then also in residential type settings where you're just overall trying to improve, say, the health of a bay or something, or something along those lines. And an extension professor, you can also have graduate students. So I have a master's and a Ph.D. student right now, and this is kind of the basis for their research. They're going to kind of divide up between those two projects. We don't know exactly who's going to work on what yet. That's kind of in the planning stages now. But it's neat to have students. I think Juice met them the other day. He's like, "You're my grand students." So it was. I don't know how that made you feel, Juice. Make you feel old? Yeah. And so now moving on, the rest of the talk I'll kind of speed through a little bit. That was kind of the meat of it there. So if an extension job is something that sounds like you would be remotely interested in, there are a couple of different things that, fortunately, I got experience with a lot of these through my degree program with Juice, because he got me out there, he had me doing a lot of things that at the time I was like, man, this is just busy work. I don't want to do this. But thinking back, I don't think I would have the job that I have now without doing a lot of these quote-unquote side projects that we had going on in the lab. So I would definitely recommend to get involved with as many projects as you can, because you don't know when those are going to turn into future career opportunities. So I know it adds a lot to the workload, and the advisors probably really like that we say that, but it definitely helps out in the long run. Outreach experience is something that's really valued in extension career. Just being able to interact with the public in a personable type way is very good. Needs assessments. And these can be something as similar or as simple as designing a survey to, gauge, say you want to work on marsh restoration or fisheries. Gauge a survey that you send out to who you think the top fisheries people are management-wise, and see what they really need information on right now. And it could be something as simple as that, or it can be an elaborate study where you survey a huge amount of people and narrow it down on certain things. Like one project that we've been involved in, part of my postdoc was trying to figure out the terminology to use when engaging the public when it comes to restoration projects. And that one will hopefully be published relatively soon. And so that would be another form of a quasi-needs assessment there. So experience with things like that, just trying to figure out what people want to know and need to know, is important. Applied research is always good. And even if you're focusing on basic research, trying to take the next step after that, past the publication, being able to condense what you've learned and what you're trying to get the word out about into ways that it can be used, directly used by people. Just saying, just throwing out some statistics and putting a graph out there, for a lot of managers, it's hard to really use that information unless you put it in the context that they can use that. So even if you have basic research that you're working on, spin it in an applied way, or think about it in an applied way, and that could really help for an extension type job later on. And develop end-user friendly tools. That's kind of what I was just talking about. This could be something like taking your research, putting it into a web-based application where you can, one that we're working on now is trying to have basically an option choice where you can determine like planting density, how that relates to nutrient removal, and so on and so forth, where managers can use that information directly from their computer and without having to dive through all this literature. Familiarity with program evaluation is important, because you're going to run a lot of these programs. You're going to have to figure out ways to evaluate those and improve them going forward. And for that, I would just suggest Googling program evaluation, because you have to come up with all of these survey methods, these assessments at the end, pretty much like class assessments at the end of courses, similar concept there. And get as networked as you can. And a prime example on that is if Juice hasn't got me involved with a lot of the different stakeholder groups that we worked on with a lot of these projects, then I wouldn't even have known about the job that I have now. I found out about that at a management meeting that we had during my postdoc. A guy came up to me and was like, hey, this guy's leaving. I think you'd be a good fit for this job. You should apply for it. And, you know, one thing led to another, and I got the position. But I wouldn't even have known about it if I wasn't as networked as I was at the time. And a lot of that's facilitated through your advisor, but you can also, you know, get as networked as you want to through these conferences and events that you go to. Now kind of transitioning into the job that I had before this one, because it may be an avenue that some of you might be interested in as well. SwiftMud, Southwest Florida Water Management District. It's a quasi-state government agency. That's what they call it. They call it SwiftMud all around Florida. So I would have people come up to me when I was like out in the field doing something with them, like, oh, you're with SwiftMud. I'd just be like looking at my shirt, and like, where does it say that? Maybe, I don't know. Then I had somebody explain it to me, what it was. And so these positions are, I would say they're a project manager scientist blend, which, again, that applies to a lot of people that are here at the C Lab. Right now, it applies to a lot of extension professors, but I think this would be more in the true sense of it, in that you're doing a lot of work and you get a lot of training in professional project management and how to go about do that through, you know, doing all the, it's hard to differentiate it out until you actually get in there and do it, but like this is real high level budgeting that goes on here, but you're also expected to play your scientist role and do a lot of literature reviews and determine the holes in the information that you need to help manage your watersheds that you have here. And this is kind of at the forefront of transitioning basic to applied science. It's how you should think about your work if you're interested in a career similar to this, transitioning what you think is basic work into something that's usable going forward. An example of this is when I was working there, I was in the springs and flows department, so I had to, one of my duties was to determine the amount of water that could be pulled out of the Peace River before it impacted Charlotte Harbor down here. So you're pretty much trying to figure out when you can tell people to quit drinking there. So I mean, it's a pretty, and you have to do a lot of these public presentations where you go and present your findings to them. You get public feedback. A lot of kind of similar to what like the Restore Council is doing now with a lot of the NERDA type projects. So it's very comparable to that. And I don't think, because my hiring manager told me this, that if I did not have so much presentation experience, I would have gotten that job. Because that's pretty much what differentiated me from the person that I beat out for the job, was the presentation experience that I had. So present as much as you can at conferences, at things like boardwalk talks. You know, you think that's something you can just put together at the last second. It's something you'll put on your resume and then it'll just be there. But they look at this kind of stuff depending on what kind of job you're going for. In a job where you're going to be in like these hotly debated presentations that you have, basically when you're telling people they're going to have to change what they're doing, or they're not going to be able to continue, you know, the lifestyle that they have there. The presentation experience is important. And I just want to finish that up by saying SwiftMud or any of the water management districts, I think there's 5 of them in Florida, are really good places to work. The Mississippi State job on my ranking of all the jobs I applied for was my number 1 job, and SwiftMud was number 3. So I didn't get number 2. So the only reason I left that job was because, a higher, not necessarily a higher ranking job, but in my mind, a more desirable job for what I wanted to do in my career came up. And I mean, just to kind of hammer that point home, I didn't apply for any more jobs while I was here. It was, the job hunting process is a really slow process, and the water management district picked me up relatively quick, whereas it takes a little more time in the university system. So I actually applied for those at about the same time. And so now this gets into the last portion of the presentation. It's just kind of tips and things that I had. I just went through the job hunting process, so I know I don't know everything about it, but this is just my opinion on things and things that you should really consider for getting a job going forward. It's a really tough market. The first thing I think you should do as grad students is figure out exactly what your dream job is. It's probably not going to be the first job you get as soon as you get out of college, but you need to make sure that you work toward that job. Fill in all the gaps you have in your resume that can get you to that final dream job. And I mean, figure out how much money you're wanting to make, what duties you want, the location. And I've talked with several people about this. They say, what's your dream job? And they list out all these things. It's like, I want to do field work all the time, and I want to make $75,000 a year. And I was like, okay, like find an ad where that is actually a job. Like, that job does not exist. So, be realistic when it comes to these kind of things. Plan ahead. It's a very, very slow process, as I mentioned before. It can take 6 to 8 months, a year, for you to hear back from some of these jobs. So a timeline that I would recommend is before you actually need, and I have that in bold there, not before you want, but before you need a job, 4 to 6 months, because that's about how long it'll take. By the time you get your interview done, you've accepted an offer, you can probably have some buffer time there at the end if you're still trying to finish things up wherever you're at. But I think that's a good planning number to work on. And I would also always suggest to finish up what you have. Don't leave on bad terms. Don't burn any bridges wherever you're at, because you never know when you're going to need those later on. Apply. Don't apply for 2 jobs and say, I'm going to wait and see if I get these before I apply for another one, because you'll never get one that way, because it's a very tough job market. And again, are you going to apply for 2 jobs and wait for 8 months to hear back from it before you apply for something else? By then you've been unemployed for 3 months. So it's definitely apply. And I know some people have to have geographical limits, but if you can take those away, that really helps in the job market going forward. Like, I wanted to stay in the Southeast just because, here, listen to me talk. I don't know if people will listen to me a lot of other places. So I wanted to stay in the Southeast. So I interviewed for a lot of jobs elsewhere, but I knew this is where I wanted to be. That was my dream job. I eventually wanted to be here, but I was wanting to work toward that. Luckily, I got in this position sooner rather than later. Job market is really tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For marine scientists, it's a really tough job market right now. And another tip is to tailor your resume for each individual job. And it'll look really silly when you finish the resume. You'll think like, man, nobody's going to hire me, when it basically is just a regurgitation of the job ad. But use like word for word what they have in the job ad, put it on your resume, because more than likely the first cut you'll have on these jobs is human resources department. Nothing against the HR departments, but they're not as familiar with what you do as what you do. I mean, if you say you work on this, and in your mind it's very comparable to what's listed out in the job description, you think, I don't need to say that. You do, because if it's not on there, they can't match it up with their word search software, you're probably not going to make it even to the hiring manager to even read your resume. So a good example of this, and I've told some of y'all this before, for a government agency that most of y'all will probably apply for a job for in the future. I submitted an application for, trying to remember what the name of the actual job was. I think it was coastal ecologist position. And in the description, they listed like one thing. It was like X hours of vertebrate zoology classes or something like that, which, vertebrate animal physiology, that kind of stuff. You'd think, okay, a lot of these fish classes, they'll count, that's still vertebrate zoology. The HR person, I got it rejected, and then I called them. It took me about 2 weeks. I got back in touch with them. I was like, why was that rejected before it even went to the hiring manager? They said, fish aren't animals, so that didn't classify as vertebrate zoology. And I was like, just simple things like that can keep you from even getting your resume in the person's hands that can make these decisions. And I mean, that was a really good job too. I was really disappointed about that at the time. Glad I didn't get it now, but glad at the time it was really disappointing. Another reason you shouldn't wait around on applying for jobs is a lot of them actually get canceled, or they're unfunded. They put the job out there thinking that they're going to get funding for something, and something happens, their funding gets cut, that job doesn't make. So if you're holding out on that, you may sit there for 6 months and they get back to you and say, this job wasn't funded, or we didn't fill it at all. We may try to look for it next time whenever we actually get funding on things. Or they just get canceled for some reason that I don't know. A lot of the government jobs especially. The first job out of school is usually not the forever job. Definitely don't turn down a sure thing, because it's always better to have experience in something that can lead to your dream job, rather than sitting there not working for a while. And be really realistic when it comes to what your salary expectations are. Because it's such a tough job market, it seemed to drive a lot of the salary rates for a lot of these positions down a little bit, because they're very competitive. And if you turn down something because, you're $2,000-3,000 off on what you think your ideal would be, I guarantee there's 100 people behind you that will be willing to do that. So I'm not trying to talk you out of a comfortable living situation, but just be realistic when you're thinking about these things. And this one may not be a real popular one here. This is based on what I've heard from some hiring managers, is unless academia is your final goal, I would try to get into job experience, which postdoc, to us, we know that's a job. That would count as job experience in our mind, but to HR departments, postdoc is not, in a lot of ways, job experience. So, you may do a 3-year postdoc, and they say, well, we count that as 1 year experience. So you basically lose 2 years experience there. So I would suggest, if you don't want to go into an academia type job, minimize your postdoc time, because I feel like job experience in a somewhat permanent position, even if it's not an ideal position, is valued more for non-academic type jobs than long-term postdoc experience. I know that with that comes a lot of publications, which that's what you need to get a permanent academic job, but I think that's just a general rule of thumb. It's kind of the mentality I had, because I didn't want to do academia when I came out of school. I was like, I saw Juice running around, and I was like, I don't know if I can work as hard as he does. I just don't. And so I was like, I don't want to do what he does. But here I am. It's not what he does, but it's in the same ballpark now. But you learn to love it for sure, and negotiate. If you are fortunate enough to go through an interview, get a good job offer, don't sell yourself short, because a lot of times once you get in those positions, the raises come every 3 years, every 7 years. I mean, depending on what the state budget situation is, or whatever the funding situation is. I mean, there's several places where they don't get any raises for 7 years that I've been involved with before. So try to start out as high as you can, obviously don't sell yourself short. And, I mean, that's pretty much all I have. Hopefully I didn't say anything to get me in trouble. But I'll take any questions. I'll be around for a little bit, too. If you don't catch me and you have any questions, shoot me an email. But, like I said, I'll be here. And thanks for having me. And hopefully you learned a little bit from my screw-ups through life so far. So, thanks again. Any questions?